everyone. This is Steve Marinucci, freelance writer for Billboard, Access.com, Variety, and other publications, welcoming you to another installment of Things We Said Today, our weekly chat fest about the Beatles, past, present, and to come. Let me introduce my two co-hosts. First of all, up in the state of Maine, our musicologist, a man who has written for the New York Times, for the Wall Street Journal. He has a book called The Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop and another book called Got That Something, How the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Changed Everything. Mr. Alan Cozen. Hello, Alan.
Hey, Steve. Hello, everyone.
And in Connecticut, we have the host of the Beatles radio show, Every Little Thing, and a man who loves Paul McCartney and loves Beatles solo music and is not afraid to say it, Mr. Ken Michaels. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Steve. Okay. I love all four of them.
Yes, you do.
You don't have to single out Paul.
Okay, but, you do. And I don't want to forget that I also am the author of the book Meet a Monkey, Davy Jones. Our special guest this week is Harold Lepidus, the author of Friends and Other Strangers, Bob Dylan Examined, and we're going to talk about the Beatles and Bob Dylan. But we're first going to get some news out of the way that's happened this past week. It's not a big piece of news, but the Shout Factory announced that the movie Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is coming out on Blu-ray. And I was surprised. I mean, I wrote a small piece about it, and of course it's not the greatest movie in the world, at least the audience didn't think so. But I was surprised at the mixed reaction. There were some people that were very glad to see this coming out on Blu-ray, and there were other people that were just saying, no, please don't. Guys, I'd like to hear, first of all, what you guys think. Ken, you first.
I never thought it was that great a movie. Actually, I know a lot of people bashed it. I thought it was okay. You know, the people who are hired to play the parts were not real actors. The Bee Gees are not really actors. Peter Frampton's not an actor. But I enjoyed it. You know, I especially liked all the cover versions of Beatles material, especially Earth, Wind and Fire's Got to Get You Into My Life, which was a major hit. Aerosmith had Come Together, which came from the movie. You know, and I like the appearances of having Billy Preston in there. It's nice to see him. Yeah, when it comes to cover versions, you have to have Steve Martin's cover of Maxwell's Silver Hammer. That's an absolute must in anyone's catalog of Beatle covers. I like having George Burns in the movie. You know, Alice Cooper's in there. It's a harmless film. I think a lot of people bashed it, probably unnecessarily. It's not a great film, but, you know, it serves its purpose, and I do like the covers. That's about it.
Okay. Alan, what do you think?
Well, I got it when it was out on VHS, and I got it when it was out on DVD, but, you know, planning for the future, I've been thinking, you know, when I get really old, there's going to be some Beatles-related stuff that I haven't seen yet, and I'll want to see it then. So I haven't bothered watching it ever. I'm saving it for my old age. Yes. I've heard the covers, you know, because of the soundtrack album, you know, is out, but I actually haven't been that interested in seeing Sgt. Pepper, the film, for some reason. Have it sitting here, ready to watch as soon as I can, you know, screw up the interest to see it, but that hasn't happened yet.
I have to say, I've played the film in the background and listened to the music. I do like the music. But yeah, I mean, it's parts of it are bad, but it'll be. I mean, you know, I'm not going to condemn it all the way. I think there are worse films. I think somebody on Facebook suggested if it had been a concert, it would have been better. If it had just been a straight concert, I don't know if you'd have been able to do that. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's not as bad. I think I guess Frampton really can't stand it, from what I understand, and you know, I mean, and it's got all those people at the end. You know, George Martin is there at the end, and you know, there's the whole big crowd at the end of that they gathered on the lot to do that last scene, but. It could be worse. The bad thing or the disappointing thing about the Blu-ray is that there isn't any outtakes, or there is a commentary track, I understand, but that's about it. So, oh well.
Yeah, I'll probably watch it as a double feature with All This in World War II, which I also have never bothered watching.
Now that is horrible. That is terrible. That is really, really horrible. I couldn't sit through that. I could probably sit through Sgt. Pepper, but All This in World War II and the re-edit they just did are just tremendously terrible.
Yeah. Well, in fact, maybe what I'll do is I'll watch those two, and then as a palate cleanser, I'll watch Magical Mystery Tour, and it will seem spectacularly, sensible film.
There you go.
Now.
There you go. Ringo issued his first single this week, and it's "We're on the Road Again," which happens to be with a certain Mr. McCartney. Mm-hmm. You can hear Mr. McCartney's voice in there. That's the lead track off the new album, "Give More Love," which I have mentioned online as a great track, and a lot of people, now that they've heard it, agree. Now that you guys have heard it, what do you think? Ken, I'm sure you did you hear the track this week?
Yeah, I love that song.
Isn't that great?
It's a great rockin' song, and I love the guitar riff in there. Mm-hmm. And Ringo co-wrote it with Steve Lukather, and I think Joe Walsh is on there too.
He is.
And it's really a good opening song, and I sure hope that he does that one live when the All-Stars.
I do too. I'm going to reveal a secret here. I interviewed Bruce Sugar about a week and a half ago, and I asked him that, and he said it's a possibility that they would. So cross your fingers, folks. Let's hope. Mm-hmm. Let's hope.
You know what? When Postcards from Paradise came out, mm-hmm. and the opening cut was Rory and the Hurricanes, mm-hmm. I thought, he's got to do this one live. It would really translate very well live because it's a good rocker. He never did it.
Right.
So I was really shocked that he didn't do that particular song live.
And there was one on one of the earlier albums, and I can't remember the title of it now, that when I was talking with Edgar Winter, I said the same thing, and they didn't do that either. So I don't know. Ringo doesn't like to change his set list. He's like Paul. He doesn't go for a lot of changes. But maybe they'll throw in the one to promote the album. I hope so. Alan, what did you think of the song?
I liked it. I liked really pretty much the whole album.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think in terms of singles. I noticed that it was announced, but I just think of the whole sequence of songs, and I like it. It's a good, as you say, it's a good opener and just a good track. So
mm-hmm.
yeah. More than the title track, which was the first thing that they were teasing with.
Yeah,
that seemed slightly weak to me. It sounded a bit like a lot of older Ringo stuff, but that may actually be the weakest track on the album. Mm-hmm. All the rest I really enjoyed. So
yeah. Oh, I do too. Having listened to the album several times now, I agree. That is a great track, and the first track is a great track, and the track you're referring to, is weak. And I was surprised they actually threw that out as a teaser for the album. That was very strange to do that.
Yeah.
The title track, I think, is a very pleasant song, but it sounds very close to "Never Without You."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Melodically, if you listen real carefully.
Right.
So.
Mm-hmm. And then I also did another McCartney setlist watch this week, and again, nothing to report. I mean, he's still interchanging the fourth song, Jet and Letting Go, and Get Back, and and Birthday, excuse me. So no big changes on the set list yet. We will hope. And one final very minor note for those of you out there. The Rolling Stones are issuing a 50th anniversary edition of Satanic Majesty's Request. Another instance of where the Stones follow the Beatles. Of course, they're not. At least according to the I have not seen a full track list. There were.
It's just the stereo and mono album. I don't think there's any extra stuff.
Well, I saw apparently a press release may have come out this afternoon, and I haven't seen it yet. But yeah, there's the listing I saw had a four disc vinyl set or 2-disc vinyl set of stereo and mono, which really doesn't make any sense at all. But I really wouldn't want to hear outtakes off that album either. So I don't know why they're going to all that trouble. It's really not worth it.
Well, if you did want to hear outtakes, there's like an 8 or 10 disc bootleg set called Satanic Sessions. So not a lot to see there. And the Stones themselves have done nothing but sort of trash that album, especially Keith. So we can't totally say that they're being hypocritical putting this out, because this is the stuff owned by ABKCO and they have no control whatsoever on it. And
it's really an ABKCO money grab. That's what this is. But
it's coming out with a lenticular cover and all that stuff. So if you missed that the first time, or your old one is trashed, and you really like the album, which I kind of do. Sorry,
do you
Keith.
really?
Yeah, I really do.
And it's funny that the Beatles put the lenticular cover out on Pepper. Was that kind of a statement there to the Stones? I don't know, but anyway, okay. Let's welcome our special guest, Harold Lepidus. Hello, Harold.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Harold and I go back a ways. Back in the days when I had the Abbey Road website, Harold was one of my contributors, and I don't remember asking you to do a blog. Did I do that?
Yes, you did, and you said, I can't pay you anything, but it would be really cool if you did. And that was one of the things that led me to continue writing. I used to write for a magazine called Boston Rock in the early 1980s, and just life got in the way, and then thanks to Steve, I got writing again.
Well, what happened then was, after I had joined up with the Examiner, with Examiner.com to become the Beatles Examiner, he joined Examiner.com and became the Bob Dylan Examiner. And some of the stuff he used to come up with was incredible. I mean, there were connections that I never even would have considered with Bob Dylan. But he just put out a collection of his Examiner writings called Friends and Other Strangers, Bob Dylan Examined. And it's got several pieces about the solo Beatles in there. But you've seen all of the solo Beatles, correct?
Yes, I saw John Lennon at the 1-to-1 concert in 1972, The Late Show. Saw George in 74 and at the Bob Dylan tribute in 1992. Saw Wings, and then saw whatever the 1990 tour, and a couple of times in 1999 at sort of invite-only private kind of things, and then plenty of times with this new awesome band that he has. And Ringo, I've seen a few times as well.
You saw Ringo's first tour, the '89 tour with Lee Von Helm and all those guys.
Yeah.
You saw the Dave Edmunds tour, and you said you saw the Colin Hay tour.
It was either 2002 or 2003, but I remember I took my son, which was my eldest son. My father took me to see John Lennon and George Harrison, the first George Harrison, because I was too young to go by myself, I think, in those days. So, so it was kind of cool to pass that along. Okay.
You also had lunch with Rusty Anderson in 2002, and you met John Lennon. You told me when we were talking before. Correct.
Right. I met the Rusty Anderson, a former roommate. His sister was married to a musician named Parthenon Huxley, and I think Rusty played with him. So they just knew each other, way back in the day. And he had plenty of other success, like he plays the guitar on "Livin' La Vida Loca." And Rusty Anderson did a lot of things, and so it just happens that he, through someone, we went to take him out to lunch that day before he played in, I think, Hartford. And, he's just nice as can be. He told us some stories, nothing salacious, but he's I thought one of the interesting things, he's one of those guitar players that seems like he can play anything. Mm-hmm. And he told me that Paul handed him a double CD of songs to learn, and he just thought, well, I know all these songs. And then he got the CD and thought, well, I guess I don't know some of these songs. And he had to learn.
Ken, you had a question?
No, it wasn't a question. I was going to say that you're very fortunate that you've gotten to see all four Beatles separately. I don't know too many people that have outside of my wife, and she also got to see the Beatles live. So, because of the fact that there are so few concerts that John did solo-wise, and with George, you only got the 74 tour and the tour of Japan, the end of 1991, and a few sporadic events. To say that you saw John or George, and both of them, many people have seen Paul and Ringo, but to say you've seen John and George and all four Beatles, that's, it's kind of rare. It really is.
Yeah, I used to watch Eyewitness News, Channel 7 in New York, and Geraldo Rivera was an investigative reporter, and he was reporting on Lennon's deportation case a lot, as you probably know, and as well as the Willowbrook School, and he would just report on the horrible conditions there. And he one day we're just watching, and Geraldo Rivera announced there's going to be a benefit concert with John and Yoko and Stevie Wonder and Roberta Flack and Sha Na Na, and my sister and I both yelled, can we go? Can we go? And my father just had this like poker face, and it's like I just figured it would just sell out. And then back in those days, this is the summer of 1972, and we lived out on Long Island, and there wasn't a Ticketron anywhere near us. So he called a friend of the family in Queens, and she just went and bought 3 tickets for us, and we got seats behind the stage. And it's a show that can never be surpassed. I mean, I've seen other awesome shows, but it was, there's nothing to compare it to. And I know there's the video, which is mostly from the afternoon show, and but the evening show, it could just be my innocence or whatever, but it was so intense. And he was just, it was a year after Imagine and 2 years after Let It Be, and there he was, and him and Yoko, and it was just amazing.
Was it the whole experience of everybody, including Stevie Wonder and Roberta Flack and Sha Na Na, that made it special, or was it specifically, what was your main focus on John?
Well, it's definitely to see, a Beatle, which, in those days, a Beatle on giving a concert was incredibly rare. But it was, I did like Sha Na Na. I knew who they were. I knew them from the Woodstock movie. Of course, I knew Stevie Wonder. I remember him walking around the stage, because I didn't know that. I was pretty young, and we all knew he was blind, but he was walking around the stage and going from the drums to the keyboards or whatever. And he was like a greatest hits set, and he ended it with Superstition, I think, which was just brand new or was about to be released. And then Roberta Flack came out, and I just remember it was getting late, past our bedtime, because John and Yoko didn't come on until midnight. And she did a very slow set, and it was good and everything. But at that point, we're going, well, when's John and Yoko going to come on? Yeah, and then they had this. I just remember they had this lighting system that only I think the Rolling Stones used, where they had these mirrors on the stage, and they had the spotlights going up to the mirrors and shining down on the band. But the mirrors meant we could see better because we were behind the stage, and but it was just this really crackling electric guitars and everything, and I don't think the recordings ever captured that. It was just really, really loud and really almost like a heavy metal kind of guitar sound, and the recordings that I've heard haven't really captured it. But John would do all these songs, and you're just wondering. I was there to see John Lennon, the solo artist, because I was not expecting to see a Beatles concert, and I thought, maybe he'll do a Beatles song. I thought maybe he'll do Ballad of John Yoko. And then, as I'm sure you all know, he came out and did Come Together near the end of the set, and said, "Come together right now, stop the war," and everything, and everyone cheered. And it was just so intense, and it's just like great song after great song. And sometime in New York City, it just come out, and he's John Lennon, and I just loved those songs too. He opened up with New York City, and it's just like you just couldn't believe he was there. You just couldn't believe he was in the flesh right in front of you. It was just a thing.
Yeah. Alan, you were at that show, right, Alan?
No, I wasn't. I was at Bangladesh.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Wish I was. That show sort of was like right after I left New York to go to school in Syracuse. So wasn't even in town for it, alas.
Alan, did you want to ask Harold a question?
You were talking about meeting John Lennon. You didn't get to that.
No, I didn't meet John. I met Paul.
Oh, okay. I thought Steve said you had met him. I must have misheard.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I met Paul in 1999 in October. I worked, as I said, I worked for a record store in New England, and everyone at Capitol Records in New York knew I was a huge Beatles fan. And in October '99, there was a Buddy Holly dance party thing, and everyone kind of knew Paul would show up, but he wasn't announced. And I went down there, and he came out and did a rave on with the Crickets, and it was it was worth it to go all the way down there just for that one song, really. And then they gave you a little poster and T-shirt on the way out. And it was only a year after Linda died, and he looked kind of frail. He looked like and he didn't even come back at the end. I think he was. I'm not sure what was going on, but I I loved it, but I'm not sure if he had particularly had a good time. But then a couple of weeks later was a Run Devil Run sort of record release preview. Right. So John Fugelsang was interviewing him on stage, and then they played the whole album. People at Capitol Records said, "Go over by the stage over there. You're going to meet Paul after the show." So I waited there, and it took forever. Woody Harrelson and Sheryl Crow were around, and supposedly they were in another room doing something, whatever, before. And we were waiting for them to finish that. And originally we were supposed to all get individual photographs and all this sort of stuff. And he finally comes out, and it was like, meeting royalty. We're all lined up, and it was about the fifth person there. And I just thought, I don't want to blow this. It's my one chance to meet Paul McCartney. I don't want to say anything stupid. I'm just going to say, thanks for the music. But then the first four people all just said, thanks for the music. and I had flown in from Boston, and my flight was canceled, and I had to get another flight, and I got a cab, and I just got there in time, and I was all stressed out. So he reached out his hand, and I said, I just flew in from Boston. And he just opened his eyes and said, and that was kind of that. And then there was a big I did bring a Paul McCartney CD in case he was signing autographs or I would meet him. But there was one guy before me from let's just say a competing record store, and he went up to Paul with a Family Way 7-inch, and Paul said, "Oh, what's this?" He said, "Well, it's your first single, Paul." and so he signed it, and then he wanted something else signed, and Paul just said, "Well, that's a bit greedy," and that was the end of that. So I didn't get an autograph. I could have, he just said, I could have forced it, but I just said, he's Paul McCartney, whatever. I don't want to ruin his day. Yeah. And then we've got this big group picture, and then through the magic of Facebook, I found out there was another picture of me of Paul in the it was just sort of like a photobomb the picture, which I didn't even know about, and that was my big experience.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good for you! Congratulations.
So, in the book, you have chapters devoted to Dylan's sort of relationships with each of the Beatles, and you sort of list a lot of the, interactions or songs that the Beatles did, or former Beatles did, that had to do with Dylan, or vice versa. And
right,
that was kind of interesting. I mean, how did you do you have a card file or something that has all this info, or did you just collect it at the time you were writing the column?
Well, a lot of the things I just remember. It's like I'm like you guys. It's just like I was a Beatles fan way before I was a Dylan fan. I liked the Beatles since I was 5. Dylan baffled me by the time I got into music other than the Beatles and the Monkees. Dylan was doing Lay Lady Lay, and I just didn't get it. I looked at him and said, what does this have to do with the guy on the cover of Blonde on Blonde? I just just seemed like a totally different guy. And
Dylan does that a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah. I got used to it now, but it was, And I had a friend. He was my next door neighbor when I was a little kid, and he was that one actually. I just remember it must have been February '64. I was playing in the snow next to him at the swings, and he just said, the Beatles are hip. And I just said, yeah, the Beatles are hip. And I didn't even know how I knew who the Beatles were, but, I had my parents get me meet the Beatles and, just fell in love with them and so on. But he got into Dylan, and he was trying to get me into Dylan for years. And I'm just saying, this guy is just too weird. I just don't get it. And for my birthday, and then there's the concert for Bangladesh where, I couldn't believe 2 Beatles were playing a concert together. And when I read about it in the newspaper, Bob Dylan was just as big a news story as 2 Beatles, and that piqued my interest. And then when he went on tour in 1974 with the band, my friend Danny got me an extra ticket, and it just totally broke down any walls of whatever I had of what the limitations of music could be. And so I went on a big, Dylan jag, and just started, learning all about him. But also, it never left any of the Beatles solo stuff either, and any little reference to, Dylan's Mr. Jones, or Dylan just singing like a Rolling Stone in Dig It, or and Scared, or he does these little Dylan imitations here and there. He's obviously had this sort of mixed admiration and competitive streak with Dylan, particularly. And John, I love John, but he would contradict himself and say he thought he was great, but then I didn't listen to him after Highway 61, and he would just say things back and forth, as I'm sure you all well know. And but of course, then there was the George Harrison connection, and particularly, and that obviously everything at the end of 1968, he went to visit Dylan in Woodstock, and he had with Dylan in the band, and had a great time. And then he came back to the Let It Be sessions, and he was miserable. Right. And he said that's one of the things that and plus he'd be singing Dylan songs during the sessions as well. Right. So there are all these connections, but also a Wings Wildlife. That was Paul went in and said, "Well, Dylan records these albums really quick. I'm going to do it too." So there's all this kind of connections here and there, and it's back and forth too. Because obviously, it helped Dylan decide to go electric and all that. So they've just been going back and forth forever, and even on Dylan's last album of original material, Tempest, the last song was an obvious tribute to John Lennon.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So what did you make of, as a Dylan fan, when John did Serve Yourself, obviously a reaction to You Gotta Serve Somebody. How did you feel about that?
Well, the first thing was a friend of mine had it on a cassette before I bought it on a bootleg, and he wasn't even sure it was John. He had his doubts, and because it was a bootleg, you never know who who's on what. But I just thought it was hysterical. I love John's sense of humor, and I just thought it was clever and funny. And there have been like slower versions on piano and stuff which haven't been released. But the only thing that struck me as a little weird when he told Sean to go wash your ears or whatever it was he said at the end. It was like, I thought that was a bit weird. But as far as a parody of Lennon, I mean, he was doing that all the, as I said, periodically for the years, and I just thought it was hysterical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Sean was in the room with him, and he was talking to Sean at that point. Yeah. Yeah. Not expecting us to be listening.
Right.
Do you happen to know, Harold, how Dylan felt about that parody? Did he ever make it known?
I don't think he ever commented on it, but supposedly, I mean, that came out around, or it was obviously was recorded around 1979. Dylan's version was in 78, so I do know that supposedly, you never know anything for sure, but it's been reported that in January of 81, I know Bob Dylan went to visit Yoko at the Dakota, and I guess to pay respects or to console her or whatever. So I doubt one of the things that's I think hard for us to understand is these people are just so famous, and they're just so used to so much stuff, and they're always ragging on each other and making fun of each other and teasing each other in the press, and that's how they used to even get publicity back in the day. It's like if you say something terrible about some other band or another band member, you got free press, and so I think that's something that's embedded in what they do. So they just kind of make fun of each other and that type of thing. And like Dylan did a song called "I Want to Be," what is it? It wasn't.
I Want to Be Your Lover.
Yeah, I Want to Be Your Lover. Right, which is kind of like a parody of "I Want to Be Your Man."
Right.
So and when George asked Dylan to do his old stuff at Bangladesh, Dylan said to George, "Well, why don't you do I Want to Hold Your Hand?" And he ended up doing his old stuff. But there's this, that kind of fame. The way they think about this stuff, I think it's a lot different than if someone made fun of us on a record. We might think, "What the hell?"
When do you think that the Beatles and Beatles and Dylan first? I don't want to say became aware of each other, but when was there a connection between the two? When do you think that started?
Well, I know there's actually a picture of them in the Beatles in Paris in January '64, where they're holding a copy of the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, and for the trivia freaks there, it was like the British version. It wasn't the French title. It was the it must have been a British copy, and I guess they played it nonstop. They just loved it. I mean, I've heard them say they loved the first album too, but I don't know if that's true. And so that was the first time the Beatles really got into Dylan, and Dylan was driving cross country somewhere where he heard "I Want to Hold Your Hand" on the radio, and just thought it was just like this mind-blowing thing. And of course, the famous story goes that he thought they were singing "I Get High" instead of "I Can't Hide," and that sort of changed the world.
Wow. Is the Al Aronowitz meeting next? Is that the next thing that happens?
Yeah. It was
explain who, for people who don't know who Al Aronowitz is. Explain who he is.
I'm trying to remember. I know basically he was a journalist, and he I don't off the top of my head I don't remember that much about him, but I know the most famous thing he probably did was bring Dylan to this hotel to meet the Beatles, and I guess they had to. Again, some of this is just from memory, and I don't have the facts right in my hand, but I think they had to put towels under the doors and make sure there was no way for any evidence for anyone to get them
to leak out. Yeah.
And I guess I'm trying to remember. I think Dylan's a pretty bad joint roller. So I guess he made one, and I guess he gave it to Ringo, and Ringo just smoked the whole thing up right away. And,
somehow I don't think Ringo. I can't picture Ringo as the one that doing that.
I think John's referred to him as my royal taster or something. He had to go first because they. I think there is evidence that they actually smoked pot earlier in Germany a couple of times, but they didn't stick with it or whatever. Or certainly didn't think of it as anything that would be a creative tool the way they did it. But yeah, then they all started getting high, and after that, and I probably learned the etiquette of not keeping it all to oneself, passing it around, and proper etiquette.
That's still cracking me up.
But they would all laugh, and then that's why they would say they would have a laugh. That was their code for saying they would get high.
Okay. Interesting. How about the George Harrison, the friendship of him and George Harrison? Where did that kick off?
Well, I know, for instance, when George went to India when he went to India the first time, I guess it was 66 or 67, or he brought all these Indian music records and Blonde on Blonde. That was the only rock record he brought. He was just, I guess if you're in the Beatles and you're looking for something else really good, I mean, you got to reach pretty high, and no pun intended. And so that was what he connected with, and then I know he was there in 1968. I don't know if there was any time in between that between his Dylan in December of 1966 it fell off his motorcycle. How big an accident it was depends on whatever mythology you want to believe. Some people think he was really hurt, and some people think it was a way to get out of those pressures and contracts and everything else that he had going on. Like, he was supposed to write a book called Tarantula, which he got a contract because John Lennon had a successful book within his own right. So they wanted him to write a book too, and I think after a while he was just kind of felt like it was more of an obligation than anything else. But anyway, so definitely the one time I know for sure was that he visited, as I said, in Woodstock, and there was a bootleg where they do Everybody Comes to Town and an early version of I'd Have You Anytime, and I think he wanted to help him get back to being a performer. Supposedly songs like Behind That Locked Door is supposedly about Bob getting back in action, and I'd Have You Anytime, according to Olivia, was which she wasn't around at the time, but said that was a way of and again an invitation for Bob to get back in action. And the fact that he invited him to Bangladesh was another thing. It was similar to what Pete Townsend getting Eric Clapton past his heroin addiction and getting back and things. So there was a lot of camaraderie and friendship, and I think it's seems natural for someone like George, such a spiritual person, to want to help someone get back on track and get back in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're kind of answering my question here, but it always intrigued me why. John and Paul were looked upon as being poets of their generation, and George was certainly blossoming at that time too, and Dylan was a poet of the generation. Why George gravitated the most towards Dylan than the others? But you were also saying before that you kind of felt that with John there was a competitive thing. You really think that he felt competitive with Dylan?
Yes, and it's one of those things that I don't think it can be easily defined. Like there was on the Pussycats album, it was never Harry Nilsson. For those who don't, I'm sure everyone here knows, but there was an album called Pussycats, which John Lennon produced for Harry Nilsson, and he said he chose some of the songs, and Harry Nilsson chose some of the songs. And I would guess that was Dylan. The Dylan song, "Subterranean Homesick Blues," was John's suggestion because of that. Him admiring that kind of thing, but also if he's the other, genius of that time or whatever you want to call him, then he's being compared to him all the time as well. And he said, I don't believe in Zimmerman, and even earlier it was, I don't believe in Dylan, and he would reference him periodically here and there, and there are other kind of references to obviously other riffs and songs and Chuck Berry songs or whatever, but I don't think I can't off the top of my head think of any other contemporary artist except for Paul where he would write about, or the other Beatles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that John and Paul never really did work with him, and it was mainly George doing all of it.
Yeah, there was a rumor, and because you hear all these rumors, and there's a rumor that in 1969 during the Isle of Wight concert, when 3 of the 4 Beatles attended this rare, one-off Dylan concert at the Isle of Wight, Paul didn't go because Linda was about to give birth, one of those the same day or something. But around that time, I think. I'm trying to even remember, but I think they may have played tennis together or they hung out together or whatever. But there was a rumor that Dylan played piano on a version of Cold Turkey. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that was a rumor from back in the day, and could easily been made up. But but of course in Eat the Document, there's John and Dylan in the back of the cab, and
right,
and there's that big there's a few minutes. It's like a minute in the film, but it's like a 10-minute stone drive. At least John was. At least Bob was stoned. Mm-hmm. So they would hang out, but it is weird. Like it takes someone like George, I think, to bring things together, because even though I'm sure you don't get to be a Beatle without having a certain amount of an ego, but he was a supportive player. Like when the Traveling Wilburys, because he organized it, it worked, and Bangladesh worked because he was in charge of it. But he knows how to work with other people better, I would think, more than where let's say Paul or John. I would think they're more leader types, and they are more into being in charge and so on.
Could I ask a couple of questions here about 2 specific songs?
Yep.
One of which is I Don't Want to Do It, which we know that George rehearsed during the All Things Must Pass sessions, and then later on there was the release version that came out from the Porky's Revenge soundtrack, which Dave Edmunds produced. But that's the song that Dylan didn't release at all. What's the story behind that song, and how did George discover it?
Well, again, this is based on what they said, which I always question, even if the source says it. But I think Dylan just gave him that song, and If Not For You, or heard them or whatever back, when he went to visit him in '68 or somewhere around that time. And when George decided to record it, according to the press at the time, Dylan hadn't even copyrighted it. They had to copyright the song specifically. He just it was a throwaway song to him, and he had to copyright it so George could release it. So that's all I know about that. And one thing I found out relatively recently, which you guys may already know, but the 7-inch mix is totally different than the CD mix of I Don't Want to Do It.
Right.
Yeah, so that was kind of cool to find out years later.
The other song, which still hasn't been released from George, is Abandon Love, which is really a great bootleg recording there, which dates from, I guess it's around 1983 or so. And the story that I heard was that it was a song that Dylan had written around the time of Desire, and it was supposed to be on the album, but he shelved it. Is that true?
Yeah, he first performed it, I think, at the other end, or when he was rehearsing or getting the Rolling Thunder idea. Rolling Thunder View was the tour that he did at the end of 75 and early 76. We had Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell and all these people, Ramblin' Jack Elliott. And he was just getting it all together, and one night he went out and did that song at a Ramblin' Jack Elliott gig, and it was an early version of the song. And then he recorded it for the sessions for Desire and left it off, and it ended up on, I think, Biograph or something. And George, I've heard that. I'm not sure where I heard that George version, but yeah, George does an excellent version. George does all his Dylan songs great. I mean, that's it's pretty.
I don't know what it is. It seems so natural for him to do Dylan.
Yeah.
And you just reminded me when the Early Takes Volume 1 CD came out, there's a version there of Mama, You've Been on My Mind.
Right.
And I had never heard that version before. Do you know where that's from?
No, I remember Giles Martin explained those things, because there's no liner notes on that album at all.
I know. Yeah.
But it was interesting because there was that. There was, I think it was Behind That Locked Door on that album too.
Yes, there's a version of it on there.
Right, and then there's also Let It Be Me, which Dylan also covered. And those three are in a row, and I thought that was interesting that, they were put there together. But also Mama, You've Been on My Mind, I'm pretty, he did it at the Get Back sessions too. It's something that he's been doing, solo versions of that forever. Yeah, so, but yeah, it fits his style really well.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. I would have loved if he had recorded a whole Dylan album. All
he
Dylan
may have.
That's true. He may very well have.
Well, I suppose he used to take bootleg video things of Dylan concerts.
Really?
Yeah, he used to take a camera with him and from the side of the stage to videotape Dylan shows.
Wow. Where is that footage now?
Friar Park, I guess.
Yeah, I know. Harold, you told me about a story that you knew about a Denny Seiwell Bob Dylan connection.
All right. So at the very end of first of all, the reason I brought that up, in case anyone's heard this, listening to this and hasn't gone back and heard the Denny Seiwell interview that you guys did, I would definitely suggest listening to it. It's my favorite thing you guys have ever done. It was just jaw-dropping.
Thank
you.
And so he was obviously Wing's drummer and Paul McCartney's drummer until Band on the Run. And so in late 77, he was going to be Dylan's drummer. Dylan was going on his first world tour. He stopped touring in 66, and he'd never toured places like Japan before. So he was going to do a world tour. He got divorced. It's a long story. But so he's going to go on this big world tour, and it's going to start off in Japan. And so this is 2 years before the Paul's famous bust in Japan. But he was at the rehearsals at the very end of 77 and at the beginning of 78. But then he had visa problems because of Paul McCartney's whatever drug busts he had before. He could not get a visa to Japan. So they picked up Ian Wallace of King Crimson. And
so they went out with him instead of Denny Seiwell?
Right. So he went on a tour all around the world. And there are some interesting stories about that. Katie Segal, or whoever that actress is, she was originally supposed to be a background singer too, but
really,
she couldn't sing. I guess.
Wow.
Yeah, they had three singers that weren't professional singers, and they kind of didn't last very long. But yeah, that was another controversial tour. But it's more Dylan trivia than I can't think of any particular Beatles trivia. So.
Huh. All right.
Although somewhere on the tour, the background, one of the background singers, on one of the shows did "Long and Winding Road." I remember that somewhere in Europe.
Really?
Yeah, they would take a little break and have the background singers sing.
Mm-hmm. In your book, you talk about in the section about Dylan's relationship with Paul McCartney. You talk about all the discussions, mainly in the press, about how Dylan and McCartney were going to do something, and you quoted McCartney saying, he'd like to work with Dylan. And then you have a later quote from McCartney where he says basically, yeah, I sort of said that I'd like to work with Dylan, and he didn't get in touch with me. I mean, I can't get in touch with him. That's not cool. And I'm wondering what he meant by that.
Yeah, that's not getting in touch with Dylan is a very common theme. Yeah, he surrounds himself, he insulates himself so much. I mean, I don't know how you get involved, how you get to be in his inner circle, but whatever it is, it's very tight. And he has many people just ask him the meaning of life, for decades. And he just doesn't really want to.
Presumably, if you're Paul McCartney, you can get through.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I'm sure if he really wanted to, he could. I remember when Warren Zevon was recording his last album. I think he was trying to get in touch with Bob Dylan because he recovered Knock on Heaven's Door and he couldn't do it. And I heard in a recent interview, Robbie Robertson said he couldn't get a hold of him. So I just think he doesn't really need to get in touch with people, whatever. And but he ended up doing that, a cover of Things We Said Today on that.
That's true, right?
Tribute, but yeah, and just on another minutia point, on 1966, Dylan had the phrase in a song, "The county judge holds a grudge," and of course,
right.
Another run, he says, "County judge held a grudge." But yeah, they more recently, and that Paul McCartney question and answer thing on his website, they asked him what song he would do. And I think he was saying "Hard Rain's Gonna Fall" is one of the possibilities, or "Mr. Tambourine Man." I can't remember the exact answer right now, but he did address it. So, but again, it's one of these incredibly famous, successful people. It's their kind of problems that we can't really relate to. It's like, how could you not get a hold of Bob Dylan if you're Paul McCartney? It's like, I don't know, but I'm sure I probably didn't want to seem too needy either. It's like, he's Paul McCartney. It's like, why can't Bob Dylan call him?
Yeah.
You also mentioned in your book an incident where George Martin Dylan connection.
Yeah, when George Martin died a couple years ago, they kept on saying he worked with Bob Dylan, and I could not figure out what that connection was. It took me days to actually figure it out, and in 1994 there was this concert in Japan where Dylan played with an orchestra, and he did 3 songs, and then Joni Mitchell and the other people on the bill came out and sang a finale. And I guess George Martin did the live sound for that show. And so for the live broadcast, that's George Martin's connection. There's actually, one of the songs was released on a CD single, and George Martin was not listed as a producer or anything, so it must have been a different mix. But yeah, that's the only connection I could find.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Cool. Any other questions, you guys?
Yeah, I have a few.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yay!
I wanted to bring up the concert for Bangladesh because, as you know, George said that he didn't know until the last minute that Bob Dylan was going to show up. And yet there's rehearsal footage that we've seen, and it was even on the DVD as bonus footage of them rehearsing If Not For You. What's the whole story behind that?
Well, it reminds me also, similar of the Traveling Wilbury story, the exact history, because every time they tell a story, it's a little bit different. I mean, supposedly, I think Phil Spector said Dylan was going around in a circle on a bicycle backstage, all nervous before he came on. And George Harrison's set list just said Dylan ? I mean, they could have easily not shown up, I guess. I guess it was... I think it was in the DVD where they said they hadn't even rehearsed the whole concert in order from beginning to end. It was just so last minute to try to get it all together. And then Dylan did come out, and as I said, in 1966 he had the motorcycle accident. In 1969 he did this big concert there, Isle of Wight, which got universally panned. Really, I mean, just because. The expectations were so high, and he was the country guy, not the rock and roll rebel anymore. And he came on, people waited for hours and hours and hours, and so he just had enough of that, and he was just a bit shy about getting back on stage. It's like, who needs that hassle? It's like if you notice, after Live Aid, I mean, he showed up at Farm Aid just to sort of reclaim his sort of reputation a little bit, but he doesn't do those things anymore. He's like, why would he? Why he doesn't need the aggravation? He's the big star. It's all this pressure, and he just rather play theaters and all that. But it's like when you hear about the traveling Wilburys story, every time I hear it, it's slightly different, and people like us want to know exactly minute by minute what happened, but we know the general story. But every time it's a little someone changes it a little, embellishes it a little bit, and
does the whole idea of Dylan even being involved in something like that seem foreign? I mean, I was very surprised that he even got into that. I mean, you can kind of see George, you can see Jeff Lynne, you can see Tom Petty, you can probably see Roy Orbison, but Dylan was, I think, the
wild card,
right?
Yeah, I was surprised. Of course, when he did it, he's the one who kind of took it over. He has by far the most material, and according to some of the interviews, I think Tom Petty said he would be sitting there with pads of paper, and Dylan would just be scribble, 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 and everyone else would be just kind of writing a little bit here and there. But I think he liked the idea that he's the one who instigated the Volume 3. I think it was his idea, and they just sort of did it whenever they could. It wasn't as unified as the previous one. It was more organized. And I guess one of the stories, if you read I think it was in the Carrie Fisher section of my book, he wanted to start some traveling Wilburys hotels or something.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, it's a story, he says things like that all the time. The thing about Dylan, and one of the things that helped me understand what he does is, like, you just wonder, what, is he kidding? And then you go, yes, he's kidding. And then once you think about that, once you think of what he's doing and realize, even though he's this, serious artist and everything, he's basically, hysterically funny in many ways. He just says things just because he has a bizarre sense of humor.
You haven't had any personal encounters with him, I take it?
No, aside from seeing him like 80 times in concert, nothing closer than that. Now, I met his son Jacob. He was very nice. I met him a couple of times, and he was very nice. No mystery,
nothing mysterious about Jacob.
No, he was very friendly. I knew he was a fan of the Clash. So the first time I met him was back in the days of cassettes, and I gave him there was an unreleased Clash album, and I gave him that on cassette, and he was very nice about that. And then there was a Clash DVD, live DVD, you couldn't buy, and back before I think people downloaded stuff, and and I had him sign some posters for my kids who were teenagers at the time. And one of my sons is the same name as one of his brothers. And he just said, "Oh, that's a good name," and I didn't say anything. It's like, yeah, I know. Same. But I didn't say, "Wow, your dad's great" or anything. I'm sure he doesn't want to hear any of that stuff. I just, plus I like him as an artist anyway. I think he's really good. Just like, one of the things that I really like too is how Sean Lennon has matured into this like amazing sort of psychedelic, guy. I mean, remember when he was a little kid, he was like in the spotlight, and he seemed a little nervous, and I liked his early records, but he didn't really have, he just seemed kind of tentative, and you can almost feel the pressure, and now he just seems really confident in everything, and I'm just so happy for him that he has this great career.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with Sean. I mean, he does things on his own terms. He works with anybody he wants to. He does soundtrack music to films. He doesn't seem to care whether or not his music sells or not. He's just doing it because he loves it, and he's comfortable in his own skin now, I think. In the very beginning, he couldn't handle, the fact that he was John Lennon's son, and there were a lot of questions directed about John, and, he wanted to be established by himself. Now he just does whatever the hell he wants. He works with whatever friends he wants to, and, he's living the life as a musician that he wants to, not caring as much about record sales.
I think you can attribute a lot of that to Yoko, because, Yoko obviously doesn't give a damn, how people look at her, and he's the same way. I mean, that's one thing you can say that he's probably picked up from her. I mean, I'm sure he's picked up a lot from John too, but that's one thing that they have in common. It's interesting.
Right, she's fearless, and he picked up on that.
Yeah. Could I ask one thing about the Traveling Wilburys here? Because I want to know, I've never read anything to the effect that would tell me what the intentions were of the band beyond even the first album. I mean, I'm sure all five guys admired each other so much. They enjoyed working together. It was a laugh, you know. They had this great sense of humor and everything. And if Roy Orbison hadn't died, I know they made this second album, but was there ever any talk of this, because the first album did so well, maybe it being an ongoing thing?
Well, I think it was a Jim Keltner interview. It must have been Jim Keltner. And he said they were all ready to go on tour. And then you figured one person was going to say no, and that would be Bob Dylan. But it was actually George who pulled the plug on it and said, I don't want to do it. No.
Really?
Yeah. But this is going to Jim Kellner.
Which mix?
He was there. Yeah, or whatever, whatever Wilbury name he is. But yeah. So, but they were planning on doing something, and then I guess George decided he didn't want to do it.
That's the first time I've heard this.
Jim Kellner said.
Well, they had worked with who I can't remember his name now. Began with a D.
Del Shannon.
Del Shannon, right? And I think wasn't there a rumor that Del Shannon was going to.
Right, that was a rumor, and I think also Carl Perkins was a rumor, but I don't know if anything was actually going to. I
don't think Carl Perkins was a likely possibility because he was much older than Shannon.
Right.
So I don't.
But Tom Petty produced the Del Shannon album, and
right.
And he mentions him in the songs and everything. Obviously, that was one of his main influences.
Mm-hmm.
But
that would have been interesting if Shannon had been in there. That would have been fun.
I think that's what they were trying to do at that Bob Fest thing at the end, was kind of have a Wilburys kind of finale there with Petty and Dylan and George Harrison with Clapton and Neil Young and Roger McGuinn.
Now Roger McGuinn would have been great. That would have been fun too.
Yeah.
But
there's so many possibilities. Yeah.
Right.
But were they seriously talking about Del Shannon?
I have a feeling it's more rumor than anything else. But
that's a name that keeps getting floated around, Ken. I mean, anytime you've heard somebody, becoming a member of the Wilburys, that's the name that I've heard is Del Shannon.
Yeah, I've heard the rumor many times, but I never heard anything to confirm it.
Bob never answers my phone calls, so I can't get an answer for you.
Very good. Harold, this has been a blast.
Well, thank you for having me. I love the Beatles as much as I love Dylan, and it goes back much further. And as I said, I love your show, and I love listening to it. So I'm glad to be on it.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we can get you back sometime for to talk about Bob again. To get a hold of us, you can write to us about this show or any of our past shows at Things We Said Today Radio Show at gmail.com. You can listen to us on Fab4 Radio on the weekends. We're on YouTube. You can download us on Podbean. I want to take a special note to thank Matt and Alan on Fab4 Radio and Pure Pop Radio for running the show there, and we always forget Michael Lynch. Thank you for our theme song, sir.
Thank you, Michael.
We do remember you, Michael. So there you go. You can get a hold of us individually. We're individually on Facebook. I have a Beatles news and information page. Alan, where you can write to me directly at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. Alan, your contact information, please.
Yeah, you can get to me on Facebook at either Alan Kozin or Alan Kozin Remixed.
Okay, and Ken, your contact info, please.
My email address is everylittlething@att.net. My website is kenmichaelsradio.com. Every week there's Beatles trivia. You can win one of 9 prizes. And that's every single week.
Okay.
CDs, DVDs, books, you name it. They're tremendous prizes, and there's always a winner every single week. So visit the website.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Harold, where can people get your book?
You can get it from Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Those are the easiest places to get it. And It's called Friends and Other Strangers, Bob Dylan Examined. And my name is Harold Lepidus. And Lepidus. So,
and it's available in both print and ebook form, correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. All right. We thank you. For Harold Lepidus, Alan Cozen, Ken Michaels, and myself, Steve Marinucci, we thank you for listening to Things We Said Today, and we'll see you next time. And come back again.